is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliet Mann.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Russian President Vladimir Putin suggests he could officially recognise two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine as tensions escalate.
The use of Ukraine as an instrument of confrontation with our country represents a very big, serious threat for us.
Yet another scandal at Credit Suisse. The bank denies allegations that some of its clients were drug dealers and people traffickers.
No more restrictions. England is expected to scrap all remaining COVID rules as the Prime Minister pushes ahead with his plans for living with the virus.
Power move. Ethiopia's controversial mega dam begins generating electricity.
And London Fashion Week is back in person as designers say they want radical change to make sourcing more sustainable.
Russia's President Putin has hinted that Moscow may officially recognise the two disputed regions of eastern Ukraine at the centre of the crisis in the country.
Speaking at an unscheduled meeting of the Security Council, Putin said Ukraine was being used as an instrument of confrontation, which poses a very big threat to Russia.
The Kremlin's also described proposals for a summit between the US President and Vladimir Putin as premature.
Well, in a moment, we'll have the latest from Brussels and from Kiev. But first of all, let's go to Moscow and talk to Giles Gibson. So, Giles, Putin is speaking to separatist leaders from two pro-Russian regions of Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, Robin, just some extraordinary scenes playing out here in the Russian capital. The President, Vladimir Putin, addressing the media in the wake of this Security Council, flanked by some of his most senior officials, including the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, saying that Russia should now consider recognizing these two breakaway regions of Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk. There is absolutely no doubt that if Russia goes forward with recognizing their independence, then that would be a dramatic escalation in this ongoing crisis, because partly it would be seen, it could potentially be seen as a violation of the Minsk agreements between Russia and Ukraine, but it could also lead to the potential of Russian boots on the ground in both Luhansk and Donetsk in the coming weeks and the coming months. Vladimir Putin, speaking at that press conference earlier on, also said that he is actually going to make a decision about all of this, about potentially recognizing the independence of these breakaway regions on Monday. Here is what he had to say about what he's thinking about in making this decision.
Our goal is to listen to our colleagues and determine our next steps, bearing in mind both appeals of the leaders of the People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk to recognize their independence.
And we also have Russia dismissing US claims over the plans it's making in the event of an invasion.
That's right. The US government has sent a letter to the head of human rights at the United Nations, Michelle Bachelet, saying that they have credible information that Russia has prepared a list of Ukrainian nationals who would either be killed or detained in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is something that the Kremlin has strongly denied, however. We've also been hearing from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, about the potential for a meeting between the two presidents, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. Here he is talking about how Russia would decide about whether to go ahead with a summit between the two leaders.
President Putin has clearly explained, and explained more than once, that we are not against summits. But before meeting, especially in such a tense atmosphere, it is important to understand how these summits, these meetings can end, and what the results will be. Therefore, the leaders of Russia and France agreed that our Western colleagues who initiate such events will present us with their vision of the possible results.
And just finally, we have a scheduled meeting between the top diplomats from Russia and from the US, Antony Blinken and Sergei Lavrov, who we were just hearing from there. But events are just moving so quickly here in Moscow and in this crisis, and with Vladimir Putin saying that he is considering recognizing the independence of these two breakaway regions, that meeting between the two foreign ministers could also now be in peril as well.
Giles Gibson in Moscow, thank you.
Well, Europe's foreign ministers have also got together to discuss the situation in Ukraine. Let's bring in Rosie Burchard, who's in Brussels for us. Good to see you, Rosie. Now, the Ukrainian foreign minister joined these talks. Quite unusual. What's been said?
Well, Juliet, there was certainly a very tense mood as ministers arrived in talks this morning. This was supposed to be a scheduled monthly meeting of EU foreign ministers where they discuss all sorts of foreign affairs topics. But as you can imagine, nothing is higher on their agenda or on their minds in this crisis, and that's why the Ukrainian foreign minister was invited. Now, the part of the talks in which he took part has already wrapped up, but he did give us some clues as to what he was asking from his EU colleagues. He wants Brussels to already slap some sanctions on Moscow. He thinks there's enough reason to do so. However, the EU says while it has prepared and drafted a big raft of sanctions which would be, according to the EU, never before seen in their scale and impact, those would only be imposed in the event of an invasion. So he hasn't got what he wanted in that sense, but there was some more cooperation between the EU and Ukraine discussed. EU foreign ministers greenlit a €1.2 billion support package to Ukraine, and the Dmytro Kuleba, on his way out of the talks, discussed some other decisions that had been taken on upping cooperation. So here is what he had to say on that point.
So we reached an agreement with the EU in principle that the European Union will roll out advisory training military mission in Ukraine. These are not combat forces. This is a new element in the cooperation between Ukraine and the European Union. The details, the main parameters and the timeline of this rollout are still to be discussed, but it's critical that we open this new page in our relations.
Rosie, we know that German Chancellor Scholz have been due to speak to Putin again over the phone later on. Might these latest developments cast doubt on where EU diplomacy can go next?
Well, there are certainly doubts, but it seems so far those doubts haven't been strong enough to really extinguish that hope for a way forward. If German Chancellor Scholz, when he does speak to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, he'll be in a sense taking the baton from French President Emmanuel Macron, who was up all night on Sunday burning the midnight oil, trying to broker a diplomatic way forward. He did his best to try and plan for a summit between Washington and Moscow. Of course, there has been doubt cast on that now, so plenty of doubt, but certainly what this does seem to suggest is that despite all these flaming tensions, that here in Europe at least the hopes for a diplomatic solution have not yet been extinguished, and the diplomatic talks, at least that is the hope, have not yet run dry. And let's of course not forget that Moscow says it has no intention of invading Ukraine in any case, so the diplomatic track rumbles on.
It certainly does. Rosie Burchard in Brussels, thank you.
Well, let's head to Ukraine now and talk to our correspondent Guy Henderson, who is in Kiev. So a fairly fluid situation at the moment, Guy, but how will these latest developments at the Kremlin be viewed in Ukraine?
Well, I think officials here will read a recognition of the separatist regions in Ukraine and certainly any advance by Russian troops into those regions as the death, firstly, in all likelihood, of the Minsk peace accords. It may also begin to intensify calls from Ukrainian officials, which we've already heard growing louder in recent weeks, for a faster move for the rest of Ukraine towards NATO, for example. In the more immediate term, I think the first thing that Ukrainian officials and the Ministry of Defence and its military will be doing is looking out very closely for activity on Ukraine's borders. In the last few hours, we've had a report from the Russian news agency RIA Novostoy, quoting the Russian military as saying it had taken out 2 Ukrainian armed personnel carriers inside Russian territory and killed 5 Ukrainian soldiers. But the investigative outfit Bellingcat has now geolocated the apparent video proof that was released of that incident, and they have proven that, in fact, that took that incident, that supposed incident, didn't take place inside Russia at all. It took place inside separatist-controlled Ukraine. Needless to say, perhaps the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry has very strongly denied that incident took place. Look, up until very recently, one of the few things that NATO countries and Russia still appeared to agree on was that the Minsk peace accords were the only way back from the brink towards a possible peaceful resolution. Here on Sunday, Ukrainians here in the capital, Kiev, marked the anniversary of the revolution which took place here back in 2014. And it was pretty clear, speaking to people here, that they did not always share the support for those peace accords.
Eight years has passed since Ukraine's revolution. This Sunday, it remembered those it lost. The families of protesters killed back then came to mourn. Church leaders, too, showed solidarity. Then came the pro-Western former president, Petro Poroshenko, warning war would be the ruin of Vladimir Putin, but also against last-minute concessions to avoid it. The price of peace, Poroshenko said, cannot be our freedom.
Even at this late hour, Ukrainians pray for a peaceful path forward. But they are also divided on whether the only existing map that may lead them there, the Minsk peace accords, will uphold or betray the revolution that unfolded here.
Mykola Bondar and his fellow protesters still relive those days. The police beatings, the sniper fire. Mykola held a victim in his arms as he died. The revolution is not finished, he said. All these men prefer to fight than give too much ground. These could be critical hours for diplomacy. Ukraine's defence ministry reported 35 ceasefire violations on Sunday, including this one that nearly hit a Ukrainian politician accompanied by journalists. With 30,000 Russian troops now due to stay in Belarus, war looks close. Even so, Ukraine's lawmakers have continued to block Minsk's path. Sergei Rachmanin is a pro-Western opposition MP. No one here is really talking about the draft law required to take the peace plan forward, Rachmanin told us. Even this pro-Russian MP admits it has stalled. The lack of political will is why this conflict has blown up again in the east, said Yuri Zagorodny. Critics of Ukraine's only peace plan say it signed it with a gun to its head. Now, as the capital marks the day when everything changed, and on the brink of a potentially devastating conflict, many here say, not again.
Well, I'd said that Russia and NATO had, until recently, continued to agree that the Minsk peace accords were the only path forward. If Russia was to answer those separatist calls, if it was to recognise those separatist regions, perhaps move its military in, that, I think, would effectively mean that the Minsk peace accords really were dead.
Guy, thanks very much. Guy Henderson there in Kiev.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, former US President Donald Trump has finally launched his own social media platform, 1 year after he was banned from Twitter, Facebook and YouTube.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Switzerland's second biggest bank, Credit Suisse, has rejected allegations it's a rogue bank after a massive data leak said to have unmasked criminals, fraudsters and corrupt politicians as account holders.
A whistleblower released data on 18,000 accounts holding more than $100 billion. The bank says the allegations were based on partial and out-of-date information. Victoria Scholar is Head of Investment at Interactive Investor.
Judging by the share price reaction today, investors are taking these leaks very seriously. We've seen an extension of the downtrend. The stock's now shed around 40% of its value over the last 12 months. And it seems as though scandal after scandal is nipping away at investor confidence and creating an increasingly large divide between Credit Suisse, which can only be described as a deeply embattled lender, and its crosstown rival UBS, which is going from strength to strength.
It's interesting you mentioned that because Credit Suisse in particular has had a really turbulent time lately with risk management scandals. Can they survive this one?
Well, this leak goes all the way back to the 1940s and is covering 18,000 bank accounts, and it's been poured over by nearly 50 media organisations in recent months. And the claims seem to suggest that Credit Suisse could have been involved in money laundering and drug trafficking. So these are really serious allegations that, of course, Credit Suisse has been cleared to deny in terms of any wrongdoing. But the difficulty is that this is just the latest in a series of scandals. It's been had issues with its former chairman over a COVID scandal. There was also issues with its former CEO, Tidjane Thiam, and then there were problems relating to Greensill Capital and the implosion of Archegos as well. So it just feels as though there is no let-up for this bank at the moment, and that's why there's a real lack of confidence when it comes to the outlook for Credit Suisse.
What about the implications for Swiss banking laws? Look, it's not illegal to have a Swiss or an offshore bank account, but the Swiss banking authorities say compliance with money laundering regulations has been a focus for years. Then again, the EU Parliament's top group saying blacklisting Switzerland is a possibility after these leaks.
Well, essentially, it does feel as though this scandal has opened up a debate about the wider ethical issues around Swiss banking laws and the implications of having offshore Swiss bank accounts. And that is where Credit Suisse has really been caught in the crossfires. But this is a much bigger debate relating to offshore accounts and the Swiss legal system as it pertains to its financial system as well. So this goes way beyond Credit Suisse and could potentially open the doors to some possible changes in regulation and the potential for some legal changes as well in Switzerland.
Victoria, what needs to happen next for Credit Suisse to restore some of this reputational damage and for its share price to start going in the other direction?
Well, I think in terms of investors, there are sort of two ways to look at this. Either we're looking at this as a highly embattled stock that potentially has no upside from here. Alternatively, other investors might be looking at it and saying, look, we're at the worst for Credit Suisse right now. And if its new management, its new CEO can come in and bring about some significant changes, then this could be an attractive stock. What Credit Suisse needs to do is focus on its bread and butter, which is wealth management, try and put some of these scandals to the past, rebuild its reputation, and indeed improve its rating among the analyst community as well. Because in terms of its view from the street, it's relatively negative. There are a lot of holds and a lot of sell recommendations on the stock, and there are a few buys at the moment. The stock keeps going lower and lower. We're looking for when this stock is going to trough and when there might be an attractive opportunity to get into this stock, so long as it can prove that those scandals have been put to bed.
Ethiopia has started generating electricity from a mega dam on the River Nile.
There's been controversy over the hydroelectric dam, which is 80% complete, with Sudan and Egypt claiming it's a threat to the Nile waters they depend on.
But Ethiopia insists it needs the electricity for its own development. Coletta Wanjohi reports.
A step towards progress as Ethiopia begins power generation at its Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The first turbine will produce a maximum capacity of 375 megawatts.
The design of this dam is a bit different than conventional dam design. So while increasing the dam, we impound and we start generating. We don't wait to the completion of the full level of the dam to be completed. So gradually, while increasing the head, we are generating. So this is the first unit based on this principle.
The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is said to be Africa's largest hydropower project. At full capacity, the dam will generate at least 5,150 megawatts of power. But the dam remains a project of concern to neighboring Sudan and also Egypt. Egypt depends on the River Nile waters and has been skeptical that any activity on the Nile would reduce water downstream.
As you can see, this water will be generating power while flowing like it previously flowed to other countries like Sudan and Egypt, unlike the previous rumours that said Ethiopian people and the government are damming the water to stop Egypt and Sudan.
Together with Sudan, Egypt has been asking for a legally binding agreement on the operations of the dam by Ethiopia. Talks between Sudan, Ethiopia and Egypt over the operation of this dam kind of stalled around April last year. Sudan and Egypt wanted the United Nations to get directly involved in the matter, but the UN said it would support an African Union-led process. Professor Jacob Orsano is on the negotiation team.
In the first place, it was not a proper negotiation. It was a dialogue. It was a conversation. It was trying to find what is the real discourse and what is not a real discourse. It was not a real type of debate, real type of negotiation. So Egypt and Sudan opted not to be positive and engaged. But at the same time, Ethiopia has always opted to engage, to invite them from the very beginning that they understand and that the project would proceed and that the project should not be prejudiced, that it is anti-Egypt or Sudan.
Egypt is accusing Ethiopia of making unilateral decisions on the dam's operation. Ethiopia insists that it stands by an agreement that already exists by countries that share the Nile waters. Ethiopia is determined to get more turbines running and by 2024 complete the construction of the dam. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Benishangul Gumuz region of Ethiopia.
German producer prices have risen at their fastest rate in 73 years, fueling fears that increased costs will be passed on to customers. January's rise of 25% year-on-year was more than analysts expected. Most of that was due to spiralling energy costs.
Billionaire and Wall Street giant Carl Icahn is demanding McDonald's improve the welfare of pigs used in its products. He wants two of his own representatives on the board of the fast food giant, saying it's not lived up to animal welfare pledges. McDonald's insists it has led the way in improving animal welfare standards.
It's been reported that sports car maker Lotus will launch a multi-billion-dollar stock market listing as early as next year. That to fund global expansion. Lotus is preparing to open a major production hub in China and plans to sell 100,000 vehicles by 2028, much higher than the 1,500 cars it made last year. Lotus's Chinese owner, Geely, is said to favour floating the firm in Shanghai.
Former US President Donald Trump has launched his own social media app called Truth. But the app, which is available from the Apple Store, is off to a shaky start. Well, William Denslow in New York joins us to tell us more about this new app. So what's the latest, William?
Well, this app is really the venture of a group called Trump Media and Technology Group. Now, we don't know too much when it comes to the bankrolling, the funding of this new social media app. What we do understand is that it's seeking to go public here on the New York Stock Exchange at some point. It plans to merge with a group called Digital World Acquisition Corporation in what is called a blank check firm. We have heard, and if you go onto the App Store and go to the About section to learn more about the app, what it claims to say is that it's different from other social media companies because it's free from political discrimination. Of course, we'll remember that former US President Donald Trump used Twitter frequently to communicate his messages. He was then kicked off the social media site following the riots at the US Capitol back in January of last year. He was also booted from Facebook as well as YouTube. And of course, we've seen really over the past 18 months or so an increase when it comes to clamping down from social media companies on things like disinformation. What we've seen as a reaction to that is some prominent conservatives saying that essentially these social media companies are clamping down on their free speech and really a voice for conservatives in the United States. So very much the message from Donald Trump and this new social media venture is try and provide a forum for everyone to express their views. But of course, this is very much seen as Donald Trump supporters and conservatives going forward. Of course, the real test will be how it can go from a fringe social media network to then begin to rival some of the huge players in social media like Twitter and like Facebook going forward.
So we said that this app was off to a shaky start. How has the launch been?
That's absolutely right. It launched at midnight, and for thousands of people trying to get onto the site, it essentially put you onto a wait list. Now, we've heard from the company. They say that it's due to massive demand that some prospective users have been put on that wait list. We've heard from Devin Nunes, who you might know as a former Republican congressman, who is now the CEO of Truth Social. He says that the aim for the company is to be fully operational by the end of March. So certainly the message from Mr. Nunes there is to try and provide them a little bit of leeway while they get this site up and running. We know that at one stage of the site, they say they fixed some bug issues that they had in the past. There have been previously reported concerns when it came to the ability for it to be hacked and its security. So obviously efforts underway to improve some of those bugging issues. But essentially the message from Devin Nunes, he's trying to drum up support on the social media site as it continues to gain users. Now it's live, and says that in a matter of weeks it'll be fully operational.
William Denslow in New York, thanks very much.
50 years ago today, US President Richard Nixon began his historic visit to China, a trip that would bring to an end years of estrangement between the two countries. Sun Chang-wan takes a closer look at this milestone in relations.
When US President Richard Nixon came to China in 1972, it changed the world. Diplomat Ji Chaozhu acted as an interpreter for China during the Nixon visit. He recalled the historic moment when the US president stepped out of his plane.
Nixon extended his hand even before he set foot on the ground. Then Premier Zhou Enlai came forward and shook his hand. He said, "Your handshake has come a long way across the vastest ocean in the world."
It took tremendous courage and political vision for both Chinese and American leaders to end more than 20 years of hostility.
We grew up during the war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea, and under the U.S. embargoes, we called it U.S. imperialism. So when the Americans arrived, we had to adjust that mindset.
One important factor that brought China closer to the United States for a new start was its deteriorated relations with the Soviet Union.
There were major differences between China and the Soviet Union in governance ideas and the realization of the goal of communism, or the way of socialism. In fact, this major disagreement aroused a kind of vigilance in the Communist Party of China.
Beijing was in dire need of a breakthrough after several border skirmishes. Relations between China and its former big brother hit a freezing point. At the same time, there was the pressure of the U.S.-led embargoes. As for Nixon, he sought to turn the tide in Washington's Cold War rivalry with the Soviet Union. China could be the key. However, the decision to shake hands with the largest communist state in the 70s was seen as a gamble.
At that time, it was believed to be an unimaginable act that would hurt the U.S. lifeline. American politicians also thought it would be impossible for the CPC to make peace with their country.
The visit was phenomenal. It paved the way for China and the U.S. to eventually establish diplomatic ties in 1979. For China, one of the most important achievements was the Shanghai Communique. It said China and the U.S. should conduct their relations on the principles of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-aggression and non-interference in each other's internal affairs, despite their differences in ideology and social systems. From Nixon's visit to normalization of relations and the establishment of diplomatic ties, leaders and statesmen of that generation in China and the U.S. rose above their differences and acted in the interest of the people on both sides. Although there have been ups and downs over the decades and sometimes an air of deep pessimism, there's always been a turning point, even at the worst times.
If winter comes, can spring be far behind? This is how I see the future of China-US relations. I have seen the last thaw, and I hope to see another in my time.
Sun Chen-Yuan with that report.
Coming up next, England to scrap all remaining COVID rules. We'll have the latest from Westminster as the UK Prime Minister sets out his plan to live with COVID.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and me, Juliette Mann. The headlines again. Russian President Vladimir Putin suggests he could officially recognise 2 breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine as tensions escalate.
Yet another scandal at Credit Suisse. The bank denies allegations that some of its clients were drug dealers and people traffickers.
Power move. Ethiopia's controversial mega dam begins generating electricity.
All remaining coronavirus restrictions in England could be scrapped as early as this week. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is about to update Parliament.
But some experts say it's too early for a complete lifting of the rules. Well, our correspondent Louis Jabarkil is here. Louis, this potentially could be a huge change. Are we really getting back to normal?
Well, I think for Boris Johnson and his government, this is all part of their plan to try and get rid of policies which have been pretty contentious in his own party in particular. In Parliament now, the Defence Secretary is speaking. We're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister. But the backbenches, those are the side that the government sits on, filling up pretty quickly. And I think there'll be a lot of people in his party who would have wanted this for a long time, particularly given the economic impact that these restrictions have. We'll talk a bit about the positives that the restrictions have had, particularly with dealing with the virus. Here's what Boris Johnson said coming into the Parliament today. Today will mark a moment of pride after one of the most difficult periods in our country's history as we begin to learn to live with COVID. And it's that those last 3 words, living with COVID, that Boris Johnson wants to try and emphasise today. Why they think they're ready to take this decision in England, at least Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland make up their own rules around the pandemic, is because of high vaccination rates. And in the last hour, the Health Secretary here has said that there'll be a 4th coronavirus vaccine offered to some people in the UK. Some countries have flirted with the idea, places like Israel, for example, bringing out fourth jabs as well. So that's 2 coronavirus vaccines, a 3rd booster and the 4th one. It will apply to those aged over 75. They'll be offered it here in the UK, as well as anyone aged over 12 who's immunosuppressed. But in terms of where this heads from here, there has been some opposition if these restrictions are lifted. Some scientists say it's too soon to do this. We're expecting a press conference in the next few hours, and Boris Johnson will be flanked by his chief scientific advisors as well to drum home a message that this is the right thing to do on balance, trying to help the UK economy. In terms of testing, that's been another issue that's been a sticking point, particularly for the Cabinet. Boris Johnson says $2.7 billion is being spent each month on providing free tests, that's PCR and lateral flow tests to people in the UK. And what the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, pushed for earlier was to allow more testing, particularly if these restrictions are removed in England. And the big talking point, if you like, in terms of where the contention lies is around the self-isolation period. What we're expecting the Prime Minister to say is that no one will need to self-isolate in England if they have the virus. And here is the Prime Minister about to address Parliament. But crucially, that issue of self-isolation periods, lots of scientists say that allowing people to go back into society with the virus when you know they have the virus just doesn't seem like very good common sense. But again, the Prime Minister and the people around him say that this is, on balance, a good thing to be doing, given the exceptionally high vaccination rates that we have here in England and the rest of the UK. And just a quick word about the other 3 countries, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. They tend to follow what the central UK government, headed by Boris Johnson, does. At the moment, there is some concern. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, tweeting earlier to say that the delay today, this was expected to be announced earlier today, but it's, as you can see, the Prime Minister speaking now in Parliament to outline the exact details. And she said that unless testing is provided, then it's going to be a real big concern in terms of how Scotland deals with the virus, particularly with new strains potentially yet to come and still coronavirus infections here in the UK.
Right. And Louise, something that's been on the back burner, if you like, while the government deals with the pandemic is, of course, Brexit. But a big meeting taking place on Brexit trade issues today.
Yeah, that's right. Over in Brussels, the UK's Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, she's been pretty busy recently trying to de-escalate, as she calls it, tensions between Russia and Ukraine. She is meeting the NATO leader Jens Stoltenberg there, but before that, this afternoon she's been meeting with Maroš Šefčovič, who's the EU Commission's Vice President, and really they're co-chairing what she's calling this stock-taking session. Stock-taking because this has been a long-running issue. The Northern Ireland Protocol, lots of our viewers would have heard of that. It was part of the original withdrawal agreement that the two sides signed in 2020. Both of them have agreed to this deal. But in terms of practice, there were a lot of complications. The UK said that it was leading to tensions in Northern Ireland. Businesses, by the way, in Northern Ireland saying they're suffering millions, tens of millions of extra dollars in terms of paperwork and checks on goods. Essentially, what the protocol does is mean Northern Ireland remains part of the EU's, the European Union's single market for goods, but that treats it differently from Scotland, Wales and England. And that's led to political tensions as well. Earlier this month, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, Paul Givan, decided to step down because of issues related to the protocol and Brexit. But in terms of where they go from here, there has been a lot said. Interestingly, what Liz Truss said going into these talks was that perhaps if they sorted this out, the UK and EU could work together on foreign policy issues, including, quote, standing up to Russia. But in terms of dealing with those the protocol issues, the Europeans in December proposed some changes, minor changes. What the UK wants to see is a complete scrapping of the Northern Ireland Protocol and bringing a new one in. So they remain very, very far. The fact they're talking seems positive, particularly for people and politicians in Northern Ireland. But in terms of any major breakthroughs, I think we may still be a while off from that yet.
And we'll keep our eyes and ears on what the UK Prime Minister is saying in Parliament about those COVID restrictions. But for now, thank you very much.
It's been something of a return to normality at London Fashion Week. The masks have mostly been off at the five-day event as international designers and fashion watchers return to the British capital for an in-person viewing of the latest looks.
Demand for luxury goods has soared after lockdowns, but there have also been calls for the industry to become more sustainable, both environmentally and ethically. Dana Thomas is the author of Fashionopolis, The Price of Fast Fashion and the Future of Clothes. Thanks very much indeed for being with us on the programme today. So this Fashion Week really marks a return to, by and large, in-person shows for the first time since the start of the pandemic. So how do you think it's changed what we want out of our clothes?
Well, it's interesting. I went to two shows today. One, it was Roxanda, the other one, Erdem. And what became clear is that the idea of comfort dressing is still very much in fashion, though very comfortable comfort dressing. Lots of puffy coats, lots of really big woolen ponchos and wraps, and a lot of sort of ample size things, for the COVID-10 that we all put on while being at home. So there are lots of oversized jackets, oversized soft suits, very 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, even zoot suit-like suits from the 1940s with big shoulders and big buttons, lots of exaggeration because we've gotten so used to comfort. The other thing I clocked really immediately at the shows this season already in London is the high heel shoe is gone, and that most of the women on the runways are wearing men's shoes, sort of traditional loafers or men's, lace-up shoes or combat boots, even with dresses and suits. So we're back to really sensible, comfortable shoe wear. I think the stiletto is only for those women who really have a lot of people looking after them.
Pleased to hear that comfortable shoes and clothes are back. Do you think we are seeing something of a more hopeful mood in fashion? There's the idea, isn't there, that as the economy grows, skirts start to get shorter. Do you think there's been a post-pandemic shift?
Well, there's certainly a lot of sparkle. And I always think that that's a good sign, right? That we're just feeling like we need to go out and sparkle and look at me, and that's sort of reflecting our mood as well. And I don't think, the idea of the hemline shifting with the stock markets is long gone, but definitely sparkle and color, a lot of fabulous color, pinks and greens and beading and sequins and rhinestones and crystals and sort of brightness, even if it's a oversized jacket dress, a coat dress, it's got a lot of shimmy and shine to it, which is, I think, very optimistic.
Sorry, we're losing the line a little here. I didn't mean to jump in. These lovely clothes, though, come at a bit of a price, though, don't they? We know that the fashion industry is still one of the biggest polluters globally. What's it doing to try and change that?
Well, a lot of brands are getting with the program, you could say, finally. They're a bit late to the game, but they are adjusting their practices to more sustainable, policies and sourcing. So, they're looking for biodegradable sequins for their dresses so that they're not throwing plastic into the water system or into the seas. They're looking for cleaner fabrics and cleaner dyes, going more towards organic cotton. We're definitely seeing a shift, and brands, if they're not talking about it, they're certainly doing it, and they will be talking about it soon.
How important are ethical concerns, though, for buyers? There's still a big concentration on cheap, fast fashion. Aren't people more bothered about getting the latest item at a price they can afford?
This is the problem. The Boohoo, Shein, Primark, Zara, H&M problem, where it's about volume as opposed to quality and quantity over quality. And, it's up to consumers to decide whether they're going to spend a bit more for something that's really valuable and worthy and makes them feel good more than for 30 or 30 seconds or one evening, and then it looks terrible, or you spilled something on, and it costs more to dry clean than it does to replace it. That, we're after 2 years of sitting at home thinking about life and big ideas, right? Existential ideas. One hopes that we're going to invest in things that last and things that we cherish, not just, art and furniture, and cars, but also clothes.
Dana Thomas, great to talk to you today. Thanks very much for being on the programme.
Thank you. Anytime.
And of course, you and I go for quality and quantity.
Absolutely.
Sequins, flat shoes, big shoulders.
Stilettos.
Oh, yeah, we got it. It's nearly 2 years since Australia imposed some of the world's strictest COVID-19 travel restrictions.
Now the country has reopened its international borders to vaccinated travellers. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
The atmosphere at Sydney's International Airport was noticeably different on this day. Marked by high fives and hugs, lots of hugs.
I just haven't seen her in so long, and it was such a big thing to be able to get over here. So we're so excited.
It's been 700 long days since the international border has been open.
A fact not lost on Upasna Uni and Ben Davis.
It's been 2.5 years since we've been able to see my husband's side of the family.
Who were excited to introduce their 8-month-old daughter to her grandparents for the first time.
We've seen lots and lots of photos, but that's not the same as a hug and a cuddle.
Family members and friends made up the majority of the first overseas arrivals. But some tourism experts question the impact that Australia's lockdowns and confusing restrictions will have on international tourists. For example, fully vaccinated people can fly into Sydney without the need to quarantine, but they still can't travel to Western Australia, which remains closed off to the rest of the country.
I think as a nation it puts us at a massive disadvantage from other destinations.
Before the pandemic, international visitors contributed around 60 billion Australian dollars to the economy and created more than 600,000 jobs.
Right around the world, we're seeing countries change restrictions, open up borders and allow people to move freely around the globe, and it is absolutely critical that we do the same thing here or we will simply be left behind.
Now that people from overseas are coming back to Australia, one of the biggest challenges facing the country's tourism industry is a worker shortage, particularly in the hospitality industry, where a huge number of people early on in the pandemic left the industry because there simply wasn't enough work.
I guess the biggest challenge is, particularly when you've had 2 years of very, very little business, is to be able to offer them pay and conditions which is going to make it attractive for them to come back.
For now, the country is focused on finding ways to lure overseas visitors back and hoping they get the message. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
You're watching CGTN Europe. Still to come. After 2 years online, one South Africa art event goes back to face-to-face.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in. Gas. So it's all begun now. Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here. Just just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. One of the worst economic crises in recent times. That's the World Bank's assessment of Lebanon's financial plight during the past 3 years.
Its economy contracted nearly 60% in 2021. But one sector has been growing: property. Priyanka Navani reports from the Beirut suburb of Metoun.
Paul Shadid Development is one of the biggest real estate companies in Lebanon. Despite the country's raging economic crisis, ongoing since 2019, business has not slowed down.
Even though Lebanon is going through a tough crisis, I still have hope and believe in the real estate in Lebanon, mainly because it has always been one of the main drivers of the Lebanese economy.
Shadid says since he began operations in 2006, he's never sold more apartments than he did in the last 2.5 years. He's even expanded into new areas of the country. He credits success, in part, to Lebanon's diaspora, which number around 15 million.
Lebanon is a tiny country, and expats are still very interested in purchasing and investing in the real estate in Lebanon, especially that now prices have adjusted and dropped to a fair level. Now is the best time to invest in real estate in Lebanon.
For Joelle Fadel, who bought her house from Paul Shadid Development last year, the decision to buy in Lebanon wasn't just about a house.
We are Lebanese after all. I have lived all the war, and still my parents had took the decision to stay here, and I would like to do the same for my kids. As long as I can be in my house in an area where I feel safe, I can stay.
From 2020 to 2021, property transactions were up over 30% in Lebanon. But with the economy having contracted nearly 60% and long-awaited negotiations with the IMF nowhere in sight, experts aren't sure that the boom will stick around long enough to have a lasting effect on the country. Since 2019, Lebanon's local currency has lost over 90% of its value, and depositors have largely been unable to take out their savings in dollars. For many, the only way out was using bankers' checks to withdraw their savings and invest in real estate. Bankers' checks aren't widely accepted anymore, but the trust in the market has remained.
The confidence in the banking sector doesn't exist anymore. And they put the money, they hide it in their house. So maybe some of them will consider, well, it's a good idea. Let's go and start buying properties.
Habib says the 2022 draft budget will help shape the future of the sector.
I'm cautiously optimistic, depending on the situation in Lebanon. It depends on the political situation. If we're going to have real elections, real changes, real reforms, several factors.
Priyanka Navani, CGTN, Metoun.
The UK has been hit by its third major storm in a week. Storm Franklin has caused damage across the country, with high waves hitting coastal areas of Scotland and Northern Ireland. There's been heavy flooding in parts, while transport services and power supplies have been affected nationwide.
One of Australia's most wanted fugitives has been arrested by police after 12 years on the run. 64-year-old Graham Potter, who had served 15 years for a 1981 murder, had failed to appear in court to face separate charges in the state of Victoria. Police found him hiding in a derelict house in another state after a tip-off.
The protests that brought the Canadian capital to a standstill for weeks have been stopped. Police in Ottawa towed 76 vehicles and arrested 191 people on Sunday, clearing the area. Protesters have used hundreds of trucks and other vehicles to block the city centre since January the 28th and were only cleared after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked emergency powers.
After the pandemic forced it online for 2 years, one of South Africa's premium art events is back in person.
The Investec Cape Town Art Fair brings together galleries and artists from around the world. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
After a 2-year physical hiatus due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Cape Town's favourite art fair returns to delight the public.
It's so wonderful to have people back in real life. I mean, as huge a fan as I was with Zoom, there is something to be said about actually speaking to collectors again, you know, seeing how they engage with the works, because I think people were forced to spend more time in their own homes and their own spaces, that they suddenly realized that those sort of, you know, very beautiful but rather bland, decorated spaces needed personal touch, and people have definitely, you know, found a way to do that through art.
There's a connection between the artist and the art and yourself, and also the fact that we're looking for something colorful, cheerful, diverse, made out of passion, massive creativity. I think those are some of the reasons that I can think of quickly out of my head.
This year's event has on offer more than 98 local and international exhibitors. One of the main art fair sections is Tomorrow's Today, that shines a light on emerging and underrepresented artists.
Tomorrow's Today is a section of the art fair that seeks to highlight the up-and-coming talent for the future of the art industry. So there are 8 booths and there are 8 extraordinary artists, and everyone is just showing their best. I'm so grateful to be a part of it. I'm so happy to be here.
The fair is hosting its first ever hybrid event, but artists and public alike prefer to see all the detail and beauty in person.
I was upset because usually my artwork for me is also like a performance piece for me when I see the interaction with the observer. But over the phone, maybe you won't be able to see the details of the stitching, of the collages. It might look flat, but at times it's not that flat. It's like a 3D piece. It comes out of the canvas.
It's just a lovely space to be in, and there's so much diversity in this space, and a lot of galleries has come, and a lot of artists gather here as well. It's just an exciting moment, and both me and my friend were art students, so it's a great opportunity for us. Engaging with it in person and just seeing these installations, sculptures in person is totally different from seeing it just online from pictures.
It's incredible to actually see things live, like to actually be in the space, be able to interact with the people that sell the work, that made the work as well, and then to actually want to reach out, touch it, to be around the work and be around so much inspiration, especially as an art student, is something that definitely missed and lacked a lot the last 2 years.
It's an understatement to say that the entire world has shifted because of COVID-19, and perhaps arts and the culture scene have suffered their fair share. But with life slowly returning to a new normal, art lovers and collectors can look forward to an exciting experience once again. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Our main stories again. Russian President Vladimir Putin suggests he could officially recognize 2 breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine as tensions escalate.
Yet another scandal at Credit Suisse. The bank denies allegations that some of its clients were drug dealers and people traffickers.
Power move. Ethiopia's controversial megadam begins generating electricity.
And no more restrictions. England is expected to scrap all remaining COVID rules as the Prime Minister pushes ahead with his plans for living with the virus.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
You know this already, but I'm going to tell you we're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And here in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.